The little girl came out of nowhere, barefoot on warm asphalt, her pink dress wrinkled and darkened with sweat and tears, her chest rising and falling like she had been running from something far bigger than her small body could carry. Her face was red and blotched, hair stuck to her cheeks, eyes wide with a fear too heavy for someone so young. When she reached the police cruiser parked at the edge of the quiet neighborhood street, she didn't slow down. She ran straight toward it, crying so hard it looked like her whole body might break apart. Neighbors would later say they heard the sound before they saw her, a raw, desperate cry that cut through the calm evening like a warning siren. Officer Marcus Hale had just stepped out of his patrol car, the door still open behind him, the soft glow of sunset reflecting off the blue and white paint. He had been thinking about nothing important at all, just another routine patrol in a place where nothing ever seemed to happen. Then he saw her, a child alone, sobbing, running directly toward him as if he were the only solid thing left in her world. His training told him to stay calm, to assess, to control the situation, but his heart reacted faster than his mind. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The girl stopped only inches away from him, her hands clenched into tiny fists, her shoulders shaking. She tried to speak, but all that came out were broken sounds, breathless gasps between sobs. Her eyes searched his face, not for authority, not for answers, but for safety, for permission to finally let go. Marcus crouched down instinctively, lowering himself to her level, noticing how small she really was, how thin her arms looked, how her knees were scraped as if she had fallen more than once. Whatever she had run from, it hadn't been easy. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Cars passed at the far end of the street. Birds settled into trees. The sun dipped lower, but right there, beside the open police car door, time slowed. The girl finally managed to pull in a breath strong enough to shape words, and when she did, her voice was barely louder than a whisper, trembling with urgency and fear. She begged him to follow her home. Not tomorrow, not later, now. The way she said it made Marcus's stomach tighten. This was not a child who was lost. This was a child who was escaping something. Before the story continues, take a moment right now. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of doing the right thing when it matters most, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Kindness Flow. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that truly need them. Marcus gently took the girl's shaking hand, careful not to frighten her, and asked for her name. She told him it was Aria. Just that, no last name, no address. When he asked where her parents were, her lower lip trembled again, and she shook her head as if even thinking about it hurt. The silence that followed said more than any words could. Marcus stood up slowly, scanning the quiet street, suddenly seeing it differently. Every house looked peaceful, every lawn neatly trimmed, every window reflecting the soft gold of evening. But he knew better. Pain often hid behind the prettiest doors. He called in the situation over his radio, keeping his voice steady, professional, even as his heart pounded harder with each passing second. A crying child asking police to follow her home was never a small thing. It was the kind of call that stayed with officers long after the shift ended. Arya squeezed his hand tighter when the radio crackled, flinching at the sound, and he reassured her with a calm nod, silently promising he wasn't going anywhere. As they started walking, Arya kept glancing over her shoulder, as if afraid something might chase her back. Her steps were quick, uneven, guided more by fear than direction, yet she seemed to know exactly where she was going. Marcus stayed close, matching her pace, his senses alert to every detail. The air felt heavier with each block they passed, the cheerful sounds of the neighborhood fading into something quieter, more uneasy. The houses began to change. Paint peeled, lawns grew wild, toys lay abandoned in yards, sun-bleached and broken. Arya slowed near a narrow street where the light didn't quite reach, where shadows clung longer than they should have. She stopped in front of a small, worn-down house with curtains drawn tight, even though the day was not yet over. Her hand trembled in his as she pointed toward it. This was home. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had seen many homes in his years on the force, but something about this one felt different, heavier, as if it carried stories it didn't want to tell. Arya stood frozen, tears streaming again, fear returning full force, now that she was back where it had all begun. She looked up at him, silently asking if he would still stay, if he would still help. He nodded, firm and certain, even though he didn't yet know what waited behind that door. And as he took a step closer to the house, neither of them realized that what they were about to find would change their lives forever, and leave everyone who heard the story struggling to hold back tears. The closer Officer Marcus Hale moved toward the house, the more the air seemed to thicken, as if the walls themselves were pressing inward. The paint on the front door was chipped and uneven, clawed by years of neglect, and the porch sagged slightly under his weight. Arya stopped at the bottom step, her small body suddenly rigid, her courage clearly running out now that the escape was over. She clung to his hand with both of hers, her knuckles pale, her eyes locked on the door as though it might open on its own and swallow her back inside. Marcus understood then that following her home had never been about directions. It had been about protection. She had needed someone strong enough to stand between her and whatever waited on the other side. Marcus signaled for backup again, slower this time, quieter, not wanting to startle the child or alert anyone inside. He took in the details he had learned to notice over the years. No lights on inside, even Thaug. It was nearly evening. No sound of television, no voices, no movement. The windows were covered, not with curtains meant to decorate, but with thick fabric meant to hide. Arya tugged at his sleeve, shaking her head slightly, her breathing shallow, as if urging him not to knock too loudly, not to wake something dangerous. That single gesture told him more than any report ever could. He crouched beside her again, steady and calm, and promised through his presence alone that he would not leave. With one hand still holding hers, he reached out and knocked on the door, firm but controlled. The sound echoed louder than expected, hollow and sharp, and then there was silence. Seconds passed, long ones. Arya's body trembled harder with every heartbeat. Marcus knocked again. Still nothing. It would have been easy to step back, to wait for backup before proceeding, but something about the emptiness inside that house felt urgent, wrong in a way that demanded immediate action. He tested the doorknob. It turned easily, unlocked. The door creaked open just enough to reveal darkness inside, the kind of darkness that didn't belong to evening but to neglect. A stale smell drifted out, mixed with something sour and metallic that made Marcus's jaw tighten. He positioned himself between Arya and the doorway, shielding her without even thinking about it, and slowly pushed the door wider. What he saw inside made his breath catch. The living room was sparsely furnished, but not in a clean or intentional way. Furniture was overturned, cushions ripped, and the floor was littered with empty bottles, broken glass, and scattered papers. A single lamp lay shattered near the couch, its cord torn from the wall. This was not the aftermath of a single bad day. This was a pattern, a life unraveling piece by piece. Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, hot and controlled, the kind that came from seeing too many innocent people pay the price for someone else's darkness. Arya peeked around his leg despite his attempt to block her view, and the moment her eyes landed on the room, she let out a quiet, broken sound that wasn't quite a sob but close enough to hurt. She pressed her face into his uniform, hiding, and he gently guided her outside again, settling her on the porch steps where the light still reached. Whatever answers lay inside, she did not need to see them. Marcus moved deeper into the house, calling out carefully, identifying himself, listening for any sign of life. His footsteps echoed down a narrow hallway lined with peeling wallpaper, small holes punched into the walls at uneven heights. One door stood slightly open at the end of the hall. From behind it came a faint sound, so weak it might have been imagined. Marcus's heart pounded harder as he pushed the door open. The room was small, barely furnished, but there on the bed lay a woman, motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her face was pale, eyes closed, dark circles etched deep beneath them. Bruises bloomed along her arms and neck, old and new overlapping in painful layers. Empty pill bottles sat on the nightstand beside her, some tipped over, some still sealed, as if she hadn't even had the strength to finish what she started. In that moment, Marcus understood why Arya had run. Not away from punishment, not from rules, but from fear that the only person she had left was slipping. Away right in front of her. Backup arrived quickly after that, the quiet street filling with flashing lights and hurried footsteps. Paramedics rushed in, voices low but urgent, working carefully to stabilize the woman, whose name they soon learned was Selene Whitmore. She was alive, barely, her body exhausted and battered, her spirit worn thin by years of struggle. Marcus stood back as they worked, his eyes drifting repeatedly to the porch where Arya sat wrapped in a blanket another officer had brought from the car. She watched everything with wide, exhausted eyes, the weight of far too much responsibility sitting heavy on her small shoulders. Neighbors began to gather at a distance, drawn by the lights, whispering questions they had never asked before, guilt flickering across a few familiar faces. How long had this been going on? How long had the child been living like this? Marcus felt that familiar ache in his chest again, the one that came from knowing how often suffering hid in plain sight. As Selene was carried out on a stretcher, Arya stood up, her blanket slipping from her shoulders. She watched silently as her mother was loaded into the ambulance, fear and hope tangled together in her expression. Marcus knelt beside her once more, steady and present, and for the first time since she had run to him on the street, her crying stopped. Not because the pain was gone, but because she was no longer alone. The night deepened around them, sirens fading into the distance, but something had shifted. A line had been crossed, not just by a frightened little girl asking for help, but by a choice that would change everything that followed. And though none of them could say it yet, the hardest part of the story was still waiting, quietly, just ahead. The hospital room was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, not empty, but careful, as if the walls themselves were afraid to disturb the fragile second chance unfolding inside. Machines hummed softly beside the bed where Selene Whitmore lay, her skin still pale but warmer now, her breathing steadier than it had been in that dark bedroom. Tubes and wires traced the outline of a body that had been carrying too much pain for too long. Outside the room, night pressed against the windows, but inside, a small circle of light held firm. Arya sat in a chair that was far too big for her legs dangling, wrapped in a borrowed sweater that smelled faintly of detergent and safety. She hadn't spoken much since arriving, as if words had run out after carrying her through the longest run of her life. But her eyes never left her mother. They followed every rise and fall of Selene's chest, every movement of the nurses, every quiet adjustment of the machines. This was what fear looked like when it had nowhere left to go. Officer Marcus Hale stood nearby, no longer just an officer on a call, but a steady presence that refused to fade away when the paperwork was done. He had stayed after his shift ended, after reports were filed, after protocol technically released him from responsibility. Some moments didn't care about protocol, some moments asked for humanity. He brought Arya a small carton of juice and a packet of crackers, watching carefully to make sure she ate, reminding her gently that she was safe now, even if she didn't quite believe it yet. Hours later, Selene's eyes finally opened. They were at first, unfocused, then slowly filled with awareness and something else that made Marcus turn away to give her privacy. Shame, confusion, grief. When Selene saw Arya sitting there, small and silent, her breath hitched, and tears slid down the sides of her face without a sound. She reached out weakly, her fingers trembling, and Arya stood instantly, crossing the short distance to the bed as if pulled by an invisible thread. She took her mother's hand, holding it tightly, as though letting go might undo everything. In the days that followed, the truth came out in pieces. Selene had been fighting a quiet war for years, trapped in cycles of loss, dependence, and fear she didn't know how to escape. There were moments she tried to be strong, moments she failed, and moments when Arya became the caretaker instead of the child. The weight of that reality pressed hard on everyone who heard it, especially Marcus, who realized just how close this story had come to ending in silence. Child Services stepped in, not with cruelty or judgment, but with structure and support. Celine entered a recovery program, one that focused not only on survival but on healing, accountability, and rebuilding. Arya stayed temporarily with a gentle foster family who lived nearby, people who kept the nightlight on and asked before turning off bedroom lamps, who understood that safety sometimes began with the smallest acts. Marcus visited when he could, bringing coloring books, checking in quietly, never making promises he couldn't keep, but always showing up. Weeks turned into months, and slowly something remarkable happened. Celine changed, not overnight, not easily, but honestly. She attended every session, faced every hard truth, and learned how to ask for help without shame. Arya changed too. Her laughter returned in soft bursts at first, cautious and unsure, then stronger, freer. She slept through the night. She started school. She stopped running. The day they were reunited properly was simple and powerful. No dramatic speeches, no grand gestures. Just a small apartment filled with sunlight, fresh curtains on the windows, and a mother kneeling down to her daughter's level, promising with tears in her eyes that things would be different. And this time, the promise had weight behind it. Systems were in place. People were watching. Support existed. Marcus stood at the doorway, off duty, unobserved, witnessing the kind of ending that didn't make headlines but changed lives. Before this story ends, if it has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and leave a comment. Your engagement helps spread stories of hope, courage, and compassion to people who may be living their own silent struggles right now. And just before we close, we have one special request. Please comment the word light below if you believe that even in the darkest moments, one act of kindness can change everything. Months later, Marcus drove down the same street where it had all begun. The neighborhood looked the same, quiet and unassuming, but he knew better now. As he passed by, he saw Arya on a front step, drawing with chalk, her dress clean, her smile bright. She looked up, recognized him, and waved with a joy so simple it nearly brought him to tears. In that moment, he understood something he would carry with him forever. Sometimes, bravery looks like a badge and a uniform, and sometimes it looks like a little girl running barefoot toward hope, trusting that someone will listen. And this time, someone did.